So, as I mentioned at the top of the show, Governor Cuomo did not accept our invitation to debate his primary opponent ahead of next week's election. In fact, he never even bothered to respond at all to our invitation. But Zephyr Teachout did, and that is just one of the steps she has taken in hopes of building support for her long shot campaign. Despite being unknown and underfunded, Teachout has managed to gain the backing of some labor unions and some newspaper editorial boards. A few prominent Democrats. Joining me now from New York City is Zephyr Teachout. Welcome back to Capitol Tonight.
Oh, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. We have so much momentum right now. Let me tell you, last week was the National Organization for Women and the Sierra Club, and today is Mark Green, a former public advocate, and we had several endorsements today. But this isn't an endorsement-based campaign, so the real energy is actually what we're seeing online, which is extraordinary, and what we're seeing in terms of really small dollar donations and volunteers and people doing their own creative videos.
Okay, so it's really fascinating. It's true, there's a lot of momentum, and certainly you're getting coverage from the media, in part because of the governor and some of his actions. How much of this, though, do you think is a protest vote to Cuomo? I mean, when you read some of the endorsements or you hear from the individuals who are endorsing, it's just as much, if not more, about their displeasure with the governor and not necessarily about your message.
Well, I'll tell you, I think we've actually seen a big shift in that really in the last week or 10 days, because initially people who came to support our campaign said we just can't afford 4 more years of Andrew Cuomo because he's really such a Republican. I mean, he's just full of tax giveaways to the rich, tax giveaways to big banks. He's ignoring the growing inequality in our system. He's ignoring our schools. We got to do something about this. We have to do something. But in the last 10 days, there's a feeling of history. I would be and want to be the first woman governor of the state of New York. And I will tell you, wherever I go, there's so much excitement about that possibility, excitement about the way in which my running mate Tim Wu, and I represent a new kind of politics, a real hopeful politics. Both of us are real internet natives, right, and have ideas about how we can really, Andrew Cuomo does some things towards high tech, but the way we see it is if we have to build an integrated system that really supports a high tech economy. And there's so much excitement around this real politics of the future. And what I keep hearing is, this can be an historic upset.
Right.
And that's where the energy is coming from. And it's not just that it's historic and that it's an upset. It's historic because of who we are and a different kind of politics that we represent.
Okay, so let's then turn, so there's now more, it's true, right? There is now more attention on, well, what is it exactly that this campaign is proposing? So, for example, when the New York Times declined to endorse either Governor Cuomo or yourself, the paper actually suggested that other than campaign finance reform, which is something that you've worked on for quite some time, and government corruption, which you've written about extensively, they felt uncomfortable with your plans in other areas like reviving the upstate economy. The New York Daily News, which did endorse Cuomo, really sort of laid it out very starkly and much less pragmatically, I should say, suggesting that you don't have the experience. You've never run a state, you've never done a budget, and neither has Tim, for that matter.
I have done a budget. I have done a budget. I've met payroll. I've hired and fired people. I've not only started more than one nonprofit, but I was the national director of the Sunlight Foundation, which is a national nonprofit. I'm frequently a consultant in the private sector as well as the public sector. But the key here is that I actually have a very clear vision of the state of New York. And unlike Governor Andrew Cuomo, you know where I stand. I think we need to ban fracking, in part because fracking and even the threat of hydrofracking is inhibiting growth in the upstate economy, because you can't actually invest in wineries if there might be toxic chemicals in your land next year. So what I see is a very different vision than Andrew Cuomo for what we should be doing about the upstate economy, and I've actually been very clear about that.
Well, what does that mean exactly beyond fracking then? What is it? I mean, I know that you, for example, say you oppose tax giveaways to big corporations.
Yes.
What then would be appropriate to reinvigorate the economy? Would you cede internet startups, for example? Would you use state money to do that, do you believe? Incentives at some point, at some level, are appropriate?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we should be doing in terms of renewables is following the lead of California and really incentivizing investment in solar. We've taken baby steps in that direction, but if we're actually going to move towards, and I think that has to be our goal, 100% renewables, that means incentives for solar. Solar farms upstate are good jobs, clean jobs. I also see opportunities for offshore wind in that area. Sustainable ag is key, but to make sustainable agriculture really profitable, you have to build better connections with the downstate economy so that we make sure our upstate farms are feeding our downstate restaurants. That's one of the reasons we're really focused on transportation systems and really investing not just in roads and bridges and the basics, but in figuring out what does our 21st century transportation system look like? How can we be the hub of that? And to do that, we have to start with investing where we're already actually billions of dollars behind.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I'm a traditional Democrat. And so what that means is when we are in a time of a jobs crisis, which we are, you need to actually be pursuing public works to be hiring people directly.
Okay, so
that's an area in which I really disagree with Andrew Cuomo. I mean, he has a very traditional Republican point of view, which is more and more tax giveaways.
Well, to that end, though, if you were elected, you would continue the Tappan Zee Bridge project, for example?
Yes. No, I'd continue the Tappan Zee Bridge project, but that was supposed to be a transit system, not just a bridge. And I think that shows the different way in which Governor Andrew Cuomo and I operate. He often governs more in symbols than in systems. And so Tappan Zee, instead of being a whole system, is, first of all, just a bridge. And second of all, there's some real questions about where the money is coming from, taking money from the Clean Water Fund, which we can't really afford at this point, not being transparent about, what the tolls are going to be. There's all kinds of problems. So, honestly, for all of Governor Andrew Cuomo's, pretending to be this effective governor, he actually has shown himself to be fairly ineffective in a lot of ways. I mean, look at the rollout on Common Core. You talk to any parent or teacher. I happen to oppose Common Core outright.
Yes.
But if you talk to any parent or teacher or kid, they will tell you it was rolled out in this ham-handed way. And, that's an area where a governor should be really... Go ahead.
Understood. I just curious, though, like we haven't seen an education plan fully formed yet for what you would replace it with.
No, I think I've been very clear on education. I think we owe about $5.9 billion
CFE
in funding to our schools. All together, if you combine CFE and the GEA. And so what that means is small class sizes, actually investing in counselors for schools, making sure we have art, special ed, music, sports. Unlike Governor Andrew Cuomo, I really support more power at the local level.
Well, would you?
So, my plan.
Continue. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Your plan.
Yeah. So my plan is to say, stop starving our school districts and our municipalities and then blaming them, because that's basically what Andrew Cuomo does: is starve and blame, starve and blame. He does that with teachers. And he does that with municipalities. The state isn't paying its fair share.
Would you then?
And I think the state needs to be paying its fair share because people's property taxes are out of control.
Understood.
But that's because the state isn't paying what it should be paying.
So would you then, to that end, change the way that money for education aid is allocated? For example, some of the higher income areas take the money. You would. And also, what then would you increase?
No, and so to be more precise, and I think I've been pretty open about this, is I'm interested in pursuing the New Jersey model.
Right.
Where you actually allocate funding to the schools that need it the most. But look, I'm going to have to do this in conjunction. This is not an autocratic act. What I can do is lay out my vision. Unlike Andrew Cuomo, not push for the tax breaks, but actually push for full funding. Unlike Andrew Cuomo, and this is really important. This is really important, especially for Democratic primary voters. Today there was a report confirming what insiders knew, but I don't think most New Yorkers knew, which is that Andrew Cuomo was really the engineer behind.
I saw that.
The Republican control in this Democratic state. And so he likes to say that he has these sort of Republican roadblocks in getting in the way of pursuing Democratic ends. Well, he put up the roadblock. He put up the roadblock. He made it impossible to do these core Democratic things. And I think that's, you know, it's a little backhanded, but it also shows that his heart isn't in the Democratic Party.
Okay,
his heart isn't with FDR.
I understand. I do want to ask you, unfortunately, so much that we could cover, but I do want to ask you before we go. The governor today did do some campaigning. He held this meeting with officials to reiterate his support of Israel. This is something that he just came back from Israel at a time when, of course, the state of Israel is having a very difficult time with Hamas, is in the middle of this conflict, and you have declined to take a position. This is obviously very important for many Democratic primary voters who happen to be Jewish, if they care about this particular issue. Why will you not say how you stand?
Well, I mean, I have a very easy position, which is I think where most New Yorkers are, which is that I feel extraordinary amount of compassion and I want peace, and I see not only the extraordinarily powerful ties that we have to Israel, economic ties, social ties, and Israel was founded at the UN in New York, and as governor, it would be my job to maintain those ties and to make those visits. But on foreign policy, I'm not running for president, and I'm not going to make a foreign policy stand, and I don't want to second guess the president or the Secretary of State on how to get to that peace that we all so much want.
Well, just to be fair, though, and we'll have to close here, you and Tim Wu are making a big push on immigration when you are highlighting the record of Kathy Hochul as a congresswoman, which you say is too conservative. And yet immigration, I mean, the state doesn't set immigration policy. The federal government sets immigration policy, just as the federal government sets foreign policy.
Well, actually, what's interesting is that the state can have its own, not immigration policy to be clear, but policy about immigrant rights in our own state. And we're unveiling a major immigration policy tomorrow. I hope everybody pays attention. But to your point, it's an immigrant rights policy about what we can do in New York State to be even more welcoming and to maintain our traditional role as being the most welcoming of all the states towards people from all over the world.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. It would be fantastic if we could hear you and Governor Cuomo sort of lay out your varying views. I know.
Where's the missing chair?
Unfortunately, we do not have that luxury, but I do want to remind people that, of course, the primary is next week. It's next Tuesday, September 9th. So those of you who are eligible should vote. It's a closed primary, which means you have to be a Democrat to cast a vote. That is the way it works in this state. And Zephyr Teachout, I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.